Greetings, I'm Ellen Barlow, and on behalf of ComW, Contemplative Outreach of Maryland and Washington, D.C., welcome everyone to our April half-day virtual retreat. This is our third retreat of the year, and we're very glad to have you joining us today. We're going to share an overview of the day's program, just so you have a sense of what our territory is. I'll be introducing Mary, and then we'll have our first centering prayer sit. There'll be a 5-minute break, and then Mary will introduce us to the human condition, as taught by Father Keating. And then the silent break, 10 minutes, and then the welcoming prayer practice with questions and answers. We'll have another 5-minute break, followed by a centering prayer sit, and then we'll have time for closing remarks and a blessing. Just please join me in welcoming our ComW retreat leader today, Mary Dwyer. Mary is no stranger to our region, having been a guest of the Virginia chapter a few years back and a co-facilitator for our chapter's biannual residential retreat at the Claggett Center in 2018. Mary is a longtime student of Father Thomas Keating and has been practicing centering prayer since the 1980s. She was there for the incubation of the welcoming prayer practice in the early years of Contemplative Outreach's growth. She now hails from Erie, Pennsylvania, maintains there a private practice as a licensed clinical social worker. She serves as a member of the Contemplative Outreach's Gift Committee and the Welcoming Prayer Service team. And Mary gives retreats and programs on behalf of Contemplative Outreach throughout the U.S. and internationally. So welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Ellen, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you. I see that we are international with London and Toronto, and I'll even add California. So it's a real joy to be with you this Saturday morning, wherever you are, or Saturday afternoon, as the case may be. And I really look forward to sharing the welcoming prayer, which is just such a powerful tool in our spiritual tool belts to really facilitate centering prayer, going deeper and really transforming. What we're about is transformation of life. So happy to share this little practice and see where it takes us. So before we get into this welcoming prayer, we're going to have a chance to do our centering prayer. And just a little refresher on the simplicity of the practice. It's one of those things that is so simple that our complicated minds tend to overlay. So Thomas gave us 4 guidelines. He said there were no rules in the prayer because it's really the Spirit praying us. What we're doing is we're allowing ourselves to be caught. And the basic discipline is to sit down. So, once we've chosen our sacred symbol, be it a word, the breath, glance, we sit as comfortably as we can, just to allow physical settling. If we seek interior stillness, it helps to have physical stillness at the time. And whenever we engage with those thoughts, which are always there, faultlessly happening, we ever so gently return to our sacred symbol. And then at the end of the prayer period, we'll have a moment or two, minute or two, before we re-engage. This prayer is totally nonviolent. So as we take a few deep breaths to really come into our body, I'm going to move over to the chair over my shoulder. We're going to drop whatever we're coming from, and we will also drop the story of whatever we're going to after. And we will just allow this time for our intention. The intentionality of centering prayer is to consent both to God's presence and action within. So I'll turn it back to you. Welcome back. Again, nice to be with you. My name is Mary Dwyer, and I'm coming to you from Erie, Pennsylvania. And this first conference, we're just going to set the stage, really for all of these practices, but particularly for the welcoming prayer, which we're speaking of today. One of Father Thomas Keating's greatest gifts to us was how he integrated psychology, sociology, the great spiritual traditions into a very direct and understandable schema that we can see ourselves within and begin to understand what's really going on when we fully consent. Now, this human condition, in the back of the book Open Mind, Open Heart, in the guidelines for Christian life, growth, and transformation, Thomas makes some very fundamental statements. One, the fundamental goodness of human nature, like the mystery of the Trinity, grace, and the Incarnation, is an essential element of the Christian faith. This basic core of goodness is capable of unlimited development, indeed, of becoming transformed into Christ and deified. I don't know about you, but I wasn't raised with my fundamental core of goodness as the primary message. I'm Irish Catholic, so I was raised with a lot of shame, blame, in loving a loving home where everyone is just to be doing the best they can, but to really claim this fundamental core of goodness. He goes on to say, our basic core of goodness is our true self. Its center of gravity is God. And the acceptance of our basic core of goodness is a quantum leap in the spiritual journey. A quantum leap in the spiritual journey is to accept that the basis of our very being is good and rooted in God. He goes on to say, God and our true self are not separate, though we are not God. God and our true self are the same thing. So what gets in the way? And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. So the human condition, the basis and the core is goodness. But as St. Paul said, why don't I do what I want to do and I don't do what I want to do? So everyone who's here this morning, it's a Saturday morning, it's in spring. I think there's a million things we could be doing, but we're here. So it's not just our intention, because you've already made the intention to say yes to whatever this great being is, into the invitation to be transformed. But if it was just my intention that was needed, I'd be done. But it's more than that. It's intention and consent. And how do I fully consent with all that I am? Because what gets in the way, at least some of it, are those first three unconscious energy centers that all human beings have. The false self's center of gravity is self, me, myself, and I. Everything is viewed from the prism of how it relates to me. So that's what we're talking about, getting unpacked. We start a little practice like centering prayer. Faithfulness takes a while to get to 2 sits a day, but just keep showing up in the chair. And what begins to happen is the invitation seems to have taken hold. So the Holy Spirit goes, well, she keeps showing up. Okay, let's start to get to work. Because remember, in centering prayer, we are not just consenting to the interior presence, to the divine indwelling. We are saying yes to the action. And what's the action? The action is to remove everything that precludes the free flow of grace in us and through us. So stuff starts to come up. The unloading of the unconscious, the purification, whatever you want to call it. And that's when most people walk away from the practice. Well, I'm not very peaceful. Well, this doesn't feel very much like prayer. Well, that's when it's working at its best. So how do I keep showing up? Thomas, in the back of Open Mind, Open Heart, in another place, said that the reason that centering prayer is not as effective as it could be is that the moment we leave the silence, our emotional programs for happiness go off again, and they immediately drain that reservoir of interior silence that's being built up. But if we had a practice where we could consent to the dismantling of the false self in the midst of the ordinary routines of daily life, centering prayer's effects would infiltrate all of our daily life. Said it's like the second engine on your spiritual jet. The first one is your sitting practice. That's where it all starts. But to really get the thrust to get off the ground, we add a little practice to begin to take that same interior disposition of yes into our daily life. I want to read something from Thomas's Open Mind, Open Heart. The innate tendency to hang on, to possess, is the biggest obstacle to union with God. The reason we are possessive is that we feel separated from God. The feeling of separation in our ordinary psychological experience of the human condition. That's what we're addressing. It's a misapprehension. That's the cause of our efforts to look for happiness in all the wrong places. So, at that basic core, what are those first three unconscious energy centers? When we came into being, all of us come with prepackaged needs that no human being, no matter what culture, what era we're raised in, this is where we start. And the first one is security or survival. We are just programmed to survive. And we do that by seeking security. So if you've been around a newborn, you know that some things aren't negotiable. They're hungry when they're hungry. There's no reasoning. They need a certain temperature. So all of those things were provided to us. But we also know that there is real deprivation happening. As we all know, our world situation in our inner cities, children, infant security is at risk. But we're adaptable. We're the most adaptable of all creatures too. So even if I'm not getting it met like I want to, I'll figure out a way. I'll adapt to the situation to get the need met. So I start out right out of the womb for a need for security. Then I move into, okay, you might be meeting my need for food and shelter and clothing and all of those things. Now I need affection, approval, or esteem, whichever word kind of resonates with you. Somebody had to love us. We can't mass produce human beings. They've tried it and it's been a huge failure. You had to have been touched and cooed at. Somebody had to really acknowledge and love your little being. That's how we continue to grow. There's a condition called failure to thrive. When a little one is deprived of that, we stop growing at a cellular level. It's an amazing fact. There's a lot of research that we may be doing this at the end of life now. If we can't warehouse ourselves. We are integrated beings that need affection. So again, we got it met because all of us are here and we're past those first 3 years of life. But I can almost guarantee Nobody got it met to our satisfaction. Some of us may have had real deprivation, but we all had perceived. There might have been a sibling. I was just talking to a mother yesterday. She has 4 kids, and they're all like 10 to 18 now. But the 12-year-old, she said, she can still feel that little one's anger towards her, because when the little one was 17 months old, she brought home the baby. And she said you could just see that little toddler's reaction was just appalled because she wasn't the baby anymore. So we can see it, but it's that interior experience of it. So what do? We adapt around it. Because remember, security survival is underneath there, so we're going to find a way to get it met. Finally, we enter that 3-year-old control, power control. Leave a couple of little children together for a period of time, and what happens? Somebody gets clonked over the head because it's my fire truck or it's my doll. That there's no mutual sharing at that age. It's just that ability to impact my environment. If you think of children you know, or your own children or grandchildren, one of their favorite first words is what? No. No, just that ability to impact and have some sense of control. So, for whatever reason, this fundamental core of goodness, and remember, we're made in the image and likeness, so God must be fine with all of that. However, all of us in that real or perceived deprivation formed patterns of behavior to get those needs met. Then from 4 to 7, we're like little sponges that just absorb all the cultural conditioning we were raised with. So I'm in the era of Camelot, the early Kennedy years. So I'm Irish Catholic, grew up president. I had a Carolyn Kennedy doll. I mean, all of that was part of my whole sense of Irish Catholics ruled the world. Mary Mrozowski, who was really the articulator of this prayer practice, it was shocking to me. She didn't think it was so great to be Irish and Catholic. So I was just like, I had never met anybody because my cultural conditioning and my peer group reinforced all of that until you get to a level that it's just you're asked to go beyond. So we come to the age of reason. Sometimes they say it's 13 to 15. I don't know if you've worked with adolescents. It's very hard to believe that's the age of reason. But as the mind and the rational faculties develop, we come to the place, but instead of looking at the truth and the call fundamentally that Jesus came to say, come to know the truth and the truth will set you free. What we tend to do is rationalize, justify, and glorify our behavior. Let me tell you why I'm right. Because I'll surround myself with people that agree with me. Remember your teenagers in their peer group? All of a sudden, they knew all the answers. And that's just continually reinforced. So we have the great conversion. Whenever you get struck by this, there's more to life. And we begin to sit and say yes and open. And then we get asked to let go of whatever it is that we have that tight bond with. Because under the guise of the false self, all I can do when I am triggered, because those emotional programs for happiness, they come with me. They're part of my dynamic and your dynamic and our personalities and everything around us. But they don't have to be. This is the invitation that as the Spirit goes on that deep dig, and Father Thomas has written extensively, open mind, open heart, invitation to love, intimacy with God, and that spiral staircase. All of that is the deep dig. His wonderful YouTube, if you haven't seen it, the psychological experience of centering prayer. This is all about what needs to be adjusted in me and in you that is precluding the free flow of grace. That's what we're about. And it's not that I fight, that I have a need still in this human form, which all of us are still in this human condition as far as I can see. I still need security, affection, and control. It's just the question of, do I allow it to be provided as God would provide it? Or is it Mary's demand about how it should be? See, the false self has shoulds about how it should go, what you should do. You know all of those stories we tell ourselves? Not only do we know what's best for ourselves, we often think we know whatever other people's answers, what they should do too. So the false self really gets in there. So we've just in this Lent had the experience of Jesus' teaching about this. So we're told that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, meaning that this human condition is redeemed. And we were given the model of the temptations in the desert. So go into the desert, don't eat for 40 days, and then the temptation is change this rock into bread. Well, my primary, when I am threatened, when those energy centers are triggered, food was my primary go-to. How do I not feel this? I'm uncomfortable. So turning rocks into bread would be a really good solution for me. And Jesus' response is simply, we don't live by bread alone. Interpreted as, there is no amount of security, external security, Mary, that will satisfy that need for security you have. You are a beloved child of God. In God lies my security, not in my bank account, my house, my country, whatever we tie it to. Next, okay, go downtown in DC and get on top of the Capitol and jump off at high noon and have angels catch you on the way down. That was basically the second temptation. So if you want a little approval, affection, esteem, get on the nightly news about angels catching you on your way down. And again, Jesus said, I don't need to prove myself to you. My lovability, the affirmation of your core goodness, is already there. Whether anybody else recognizes it, it is your task to own that. And finally, bow down to me and I'll give you half of this kingdom. And some days I'd really like my own kingdom. I'll be quite honest with you. That's a very tempting proposal. And Jesus just says, no, get behind me, Satan. That's the illusion. Original sin, concupiscence, illusion, and I'm forgetting the third one right now, but we're looking for love in all the wrong places. Those fundamental core needs, we don't fight: security, affection, and control. What we begin to have unpacked is our cultural over-identification with them and that prepackaged system of how they need to look. Because often we are deeply loved, but the one we want to love us isn't loving us like we would like them to. So we look for it somewhere else. And this radical, invincible trust that we're called to on this journey is to trust that we're exactly where we need to be in this moment, and that what's happening we cooperate with. Thomas has a wonderful quote. I have it all over my wall behind me. God joins us wherever we are just as we are, and only asks us to be who we are. Here's the question: am I showing up as my true self, the word that was spoken in my ordinary circumstances of daily life? Or am I showing up out of my false self, which are a bunch of my brokenness, all of the patterns of behavior that I adapted to when I was too young to even know what was going on, and continue to play out? All of us have worked in situations where you recreate your family of origin, and you see people tantrum, you see this, and you can change jobs, you can change marriages, you can change your looks, you can change everything, but you'll keep bumping into the same type of person. It can morph over and over again because we come to recognize the issues in me, believe it or not, and you, not in the externals. Mary Mrozowski, who was the real articulator of the welcoming prayer, was, I call her the Amma of contemplative outreach. If Thomas Keating is our Abba, Mary was our Amma. And she was instrumental in my own journey, but she was the anchor at Chrysali's house with David Furnett and Kathy McCarthy, and I had the privilege of living there a few years. And it was an incubator for many of these practices that we have. And she always credited the little book Abandonment to Divine Providence by Jean-Pierre de Caussade as one of the originators of the welcoming prayer, or one of the sources. She had a lot because she was like a sponge, but de Caussade said, there is never a moment when God does not come forward, and all that takes place within us, around us, and through us both hides and includes God's activity. So this whole movement we're entering is, how do I stay present in the moment, living out the values that you've already consented to with the top 3 inches of your head, but how do I live them out in the ordinary routines of daily life? Because Father Thomas in the back of Open Mind, Open Heart makes a very challenging statement. He says that the path, the monastic structure, I always wanted to be a monk in some ways, the monastic structure is not the path of holiness for lay folks. The ordinary routines of daily life are, with their never-ending round of ordinary activities, which means going to the grocery store, opening the mail, paying your bills, driving in traffic. That's where God is manifesting. So how do I take that same level of openness and consent and live out these gospel values, the contemplative dimension of life, in the midst of my ordinary activities of daily life? That's what welcoming prayer is totally at the service of. And it's right here, right now. We always have the opportunity to consent at ever deepening levels. So the false self, we're loving it into life. It doesn't just go away. We're just loving it into life. That was Mary's great image of, come here, you little cutie, I want to dance with you. So how do we find out this interior dance and what is ours to do? So as we do that, we just move deeper and deeper into this practice that we're going to share after a break. But I'd like to open it up if there's any questions or comments. Do you have a human condition? Can you relate to that? I know Ellen's raising her hand.
Megan in the chat is saying she completely relates.
I see Kathy's hand went up. Did you have a comment, Kathy? No? Okay. Let me give a little example of how it played out in my life, and how integrated I believe we are. As I've shared, food's one of my primary sources. I have a lot. I'm a big believer in all of the 12 steps. But in my family of origin, and I'm the youngest of 5, but it was very much, I think I'm a surprise because the rest were in 10 years and I'm 8 years later. So when I came about, the story always was that thank God that because my parents were older, that I was given, my parents said, I love to sleep. And if you knew me, eating and sleeping are really important to me and they're pretty much non-negotiable. So that was the joke, that I liked to sleep so much that I even slept through my first feeding. So years later, here I am at Chrysali's house because I kept trying to heal myself from the outside in. I'm a Georgetown graduate. I love the Jesuits. I did the Ignatian exercises. I was really considered an intellectual Catholic. And then I was going for masters in human psychology and social work, but it wasn't touching what I knew were my issues. It just made me more frustrated because now I understood and I had words to describe how screwed up I was, but it wasn't impacting being screwed up. So along comes Father Thomas that basically says, sit down twice a day. Allow yourself to be healed. You're not the healer, you're the healee. So allowing. So I really committed to it, ended up living at Chrysali's house. And it was there that the realization came to me after one of the retreats and Mary's teaching on this, that, I am sure that I slept through my first feeding, but I don't believe I slept to my second feeding because the energy around food is beyond what a normal, typical person would be. That when I'm under stress, going for that is like a matter of life or death. And it was just that there is an energy, an emotional program for happiness that was very much tied to food. So not always do we get those insights. A lot of mine, I don't know where they come from, but it was a real recording. And my mother was still alive, and I was in my 30s at the time. So I called her up and I wanted to ask some questions. But I was born in 1958 and babies weren't rooming in with moms. And it was a really big deal to be put on a schedule. So I asked her, was it true I slept through my first feeding? And she said, yes. And the doctor just said you probably needed sleep more than you needed food. But I knew intuitively I didn't sleep to my second feeding. Because I said to her, was I on a schedule? She said, yes, it was yes, you were on a schedule. And you weren't in the room. So whatever that energy tied to, that fundamental core was being worked on. The divine indwelling was really giving me a job because at Chrysali's house, there I was and my hand was in the cookie jar. So I knew it was all tied together, that when my stuff was coming up, one of the first places I was turning to was food. It didn't matter that I was 30 years post and I was not going to starve to death, believe me, if I missed a meal. But the energy behind it. So those energy centers are very old and very tied to our very identity of who we think we are. And that's where spirit's really going to go. Because Thomas Merton said, be careful of making friends of the spirit. Spirit's going to ask you to die. So that's what we are. We're dying to the false self so that we can truly live in the gift of our true self. So we're just at the time. We are going to have a 10-minute silent break. So I would ask us to go back into silence, and we will come back at 10:26, let's say. I think I'm a minute off, and that we will then begin to practice the welcoming prayer. Okay? Okay. Welcome back. And I see that now we are going to have the question of what do we do in surrendering and really consenting to this invitation. which is a phenomenal gift. Father Thomas, in one of the Contemplative Outreach newsletters from December of 2015, wrote, "God is already here. Hence, to search for God at a certain point in our spiritual evolution is a mistake. It's no longer the proper time for that kind of effort. The most productive effort is to accept the endless humiliations of the false self." You know, he goes on to say at a piece in Open Mind, Open Heart, there's a sentence that's like a koan in my life. He said, "Consenting to God's presence is God's presence." Let me say that again. Consenting to God's presence is God's presence. Well, when I'm on retreat or in a really happy space, okay, sure. But think of that. That means if you say yes in the midst of your most yucky period in your day, in your emotions, in your life, to say yes or consent in that moment is God's presence. Thomas also gave us that there is no effort in consent. It's really an opening, open mind, open heart, an opening, not an effort. You know how you try to push? You can even see it sometimes in prayer groups when people are trying to do their centering prayer and they squish up their face as if they're trying to keep those thoughts away. When thoughts are inevitable and integral to the prayer. Well, similarly, in our life, all of our stuff comes up. And the gift is we become even more aware. So now we're going to have this little welcoming prayer practice to begin to take that same level of consent. We take it on the go. Because that's what it's called. Centering prayer or welcoming prayer is called consent on the go. Mary Mrozowski said, "To welcome and let go is one of the most radically loving, faith-filled gestures we can make in each moment of the day. It is an open-hearted embrace of all that is in ourselves and in the world." You know, I kind of laugh because a lot of in psychological circles and in secular circles and in young circles and in the grocery store, what do you see over all of the magazines? The hot topic is mindfulness. Well, we're just taking mindfulness to the next level. First, we're going to be aware and be present. Then we're going to do something with it, which is to surrender it back to the one who's loving us into life. And that's the essence of the welcoming prayer. So there are 3 movements, and you had the handout sent to you, so you will have it. I suggest that you post it as much as you can, because we have a built-in forgetter, and the false self will do everything in its power not to be dismantled. So the false self doesn't come and say, "Oh, I know you don't need me anymore. You grew up. You're doing fine." It says, "This is who you are, Mary. Of course you need me. I'm right." So it's a practice that the more we practice, the more we recognize how much we have to practice with. When I first learned this practice, I went to Mary Mrozowski and I said, "I'm going to be doing this 24/7. I'll never forget her response to me. She said, "You should be so lucky." Because remember, we are unconscious most of the time. We have a level of consciousness that's where we're choosing to live the values we believe in. We know the divine indwelling is animating us at every millisecond of our being. Otherwise, Thomas teaches, we would be grease spots. So the grease spot theology is, if you look down and there's still physical being attached to you, you can see feet. God is here, regardless of your psychological experience of this moment. But we also know there's that unconscious. We talked about those first 3 energy centers. They're unconscious. You're not going to think yourself better. It's not in another book or another video. It's a lived experience. 12 steps say we act ourselves into better thinking. We don't think ourselves into better acting. And I think that many of us can relate to that. You're educated, but it doesn't always help. Sometimes it actually hinders. There was another point where Thomas said, our biggest defense mechanism against God is thinking about God. So anyway, the first moment of the prayer, and Mary used to talk about it either as a dance, so movements, moments, think of it in motion. The first movement is to feel and sink into whatever I'm experiencing in this moment in my body. Well, aren't we talking about unconscious energy centers? So why do I have to feel my body? Because you never have a feeling without a corresponding thought that isn't located somewhere in your body. We are physical beings. We have found through teaching this practice since the 1980s, 90s, early 2000s and on, that the safest way is to ground it in our physical being. Sometimes people do get emotionally connected and they go up in their heads and can be with that. But for most of us, you can find somewhere that it lands in your physical being. So I feel, all I'm being asked to do is feel and sink into whatever I'm experiencing in my physical being in this moment. The second movement of the prayer is to interiorly say, welcome what I'm experiencing in my body at this moment as an opportunity to consent to the divine indwelling's work within me. So if I really believe in the incarnation, if I can really own the fact that I and you are animated by the divine indwelling, it gives me the courage to say yes to that, to welcome. And finally, we will add one little sentence. It used to be a lot more, but we've simplified the practice. The sentence goes like this now. I let go of my desire. I'm not letting go of desire. I'm letting go of my prepackaged agenda of how these desires should manifest in my life. In the Book of Common Prayer, or the prologue to the Cloud of Unknowing, there's that beautiful prayer, and to God, unto whom all hearts lie open, unto whom desire is eloquent. The deepest desires of your heart, I believe, are from God. So I don't fight with the desire for security, affection, control. You need it, I need it. That's a reality of my human condition. What I'm letting go of is how I think it should look. God, this isn't what I thought it would be. No, sorry, no, this, let me tell you. And it's surrendering to letting God manifest security, affection, and control in my life, which is trusting, the radical, invincible trust that I'm being loved into life, that it's already redeemed, and I'm just asking to get out of the way so that I can be part of the redemption. and not keep repeating the brokenness. So I let go of my desire for security, affection, control, and embrace this moment as it is. So if we look at it, I'm first noticing that something's up with me. So that's kind of the prelude to using the welcoming prayer. Something's up. And so we become a little bit more aware of, I'm getting a headache. I might be clenching my jaw. My heart's really excited. I'm kind of getting all fluttery. We begin to notice. My back hurts. If you have chronic pain, this practice is awesome because you get all these opportunities to welcome. And that's how we begin to see them. That whatever's going on is just another opportunity to turn to God in love. So let's take a moment to just see what's happening in you. You might want to close your eyes. You don't have to. But just allow yourself to do a body scan. Where are you? What's going on in your physical being? Start with the soles of your feet. Just come right up through your shins, by your knees, just taking that inner eye just like a laser beam. Can you feel your sits bones? What about your hips and your back? How's your spine today? What about your intestinal tract? Just be aware. Just notice any sensation. Come up into your shoulders, in your chest. Are you carrying anything that doesn't need to be there? Down through your arms into your hands. What do those joints feel like? Bring your interior eye just right up into your neck now and enter your jaw. Your sinuses behind your eyes. Can you feel your scalp? It's just a way to take a few deep breaths and come into the chair. Now, when things are really up for us, we're generally aware. It's a great gift of physical pain because it allows us to move right into what we're feeling. But sometimes we're kind of trapped up here and we kind of dissociate a little bit from our physical beings. So a body scan can bring us into what's going on. So have you noticed anything? If you haven't, because sometimes when we've had centering prayer, when we're in the midst of community, we might be relatively relaxed. So I would ask you to think of a situation or a person, relationship, or issue in your life that you have some issues with. And all we have to do is to place them in our consciousness just for about 30 seconds. And feel what reacts. I just felt my shoulders react. I thought of Ukraine. And I felt the band go right across. So it's not to focus on external, but sometimes I may be working with a relationship, an upcoming event, or something that happened. I allow that to be in my consciousness. Then I come into my body and see, where is it landed? Where am I holding that? Or what is reacting to it? So I'll give you a moment to allow yourself. Eyes can be opened or closed. This is consent on the go. But we're breaking it apart to practice. So allow yourself to feel and sink into whatever you're experiencing in this moment in your body. Anchor your breath there. Bring your full attention to join it. As you move into it, surround yourself with it. Interiorly, we say, welcome. Welcome. Trusting that God is present in the most faultless way. Welcome. If the sensation moves, we allow our attention to move right with it. It may intensify, it may diminish, it doesn't matter. Welcome. And then we add, I let go of my desire for security, affection, control, and embrace this moment as it is. Welcome. Welcome. I keep my full attention right where I feel it. It's moved from my hip back up to my shoulder. Welcome. I let go of my desire for security, affection, control, and embrace this moment as it is. And when you're ready, we just return to the ordinary events of our daily life. In this practice and in teaching it, we're sitting. We're in our chairs and we're pulling it apart. But this practice can be used in the heat of the moment, in the midst of driving, in the workplace, in the family setting, in wherever we are. But the more we practice, the more natural and organic it becomes. Father Thomas, in another one of his our newsletters from June of 2014, makes this statement: powerlessness is our greatest treasure. Don't try to get rid of it. Everything in us wants to get rid of it. Grace is sufficient for you, but not something you can understand. To be in too big a hurry to get over our difficulties is a mistake, because you don't know how valuable they are from God's perspective. For without them, you might never be transformed as deeply and as thoroughly. He says in another place, true power is powerless. Real security is having none. Pure hope is in the midst of hopelessness. True faith is full of doubts. And real love is nothing but service, indeed service unto death. So we're participating in that big transformation process by simply showing up to our own physical beings whenever we're aware anything is going on. The gift of welcoming is I don't have to analyze it. I don't have to explain it, understand it. All I need to know is I have a twitch. I have a toothache. I have a headache. I have a fluttering. I have a lightness. Whatever I'm experiencing in the moment is what I consent to. If I need to understand it, if there's something more to it, I can trust that I will. But it gives me that ability to be present and consenting in the ordinary routines of daily life. And most of the time, the gift of aging is our bodies start to talk whether we want to or not. So you may think you know why you have a headache or you have chronic arthritis, but you get the opportunity to pray with it. And isn't that the gift? First, before you go for whatever you take for your headache or do for what the other stuff, we're turning and consenting with our whole being. So chronic pain becomes a gift. It's your purification. And there's nothing that gets us so shiny by this deep consenting. Mary Mrozowski said the shorthand for welcoming would be like saying, yes, yes. Yes to what? Yes to the divine indwelling manifesting in our humanity, however it chooses to manifest. So let's practice once more, and then we'll open it to some questions. Again, if there's a person, place, or thing that's troublesome to you, or that you're excited about, allow them to kind of be in your thoughts. Otherwise, it might just be sitting in the chair for a couple of hours in the morning will do it to my body. We'll get talking. So just take a few deep breaths and notice what is it that's beckoning you? Where do you feel you're being called to in this moment in your body? Feel it, sink into it, just like you're getting into that jacuzzi Thomas talks about. Just allow yourself to immerse your full attention wherever's landing in your physical being. It might even be the weight of your body in the chair, your feet on the ground, wherever you're called to. Allow your full attention to sink in and feel it. Interiorly welcome. Welcome. It's just energy, so it may move. If it moves, allow your attention to move right with it. I let go of my desire for security, affection, control. And embrace this moment as it is. Welcome. Welcome. I let go of my desire for security, affection, control. You may have a pop at saying one of those. And embrace this moment as it is. Yes. So, questions or comments on your experience? Joanna says, my mind is an expert at dashing away from the experience in the moment. Mine too. I've worked with setting a 90-second timer. Any thoughts on that? I'm guessing that it's a 90-second timer to stay with the experience or to practice being with it. That's what I do with my breath when I say anchoring with the breath. I see how long I can breathe into whatever it is I'm experiencing. Because if we really could hold to, emotions are simply energy in motion, and they're only asking to be felt. It's what my head does with the story and that commentary, that top 3 inches of the head that wants to, what does this mean? What? Blah, blah, blah. And all I'm doing is moving into it in an open-hearted fashion as best I can. If the thoughts get really, really intense, there's a little corollary practice which is introduced at the level of thought. And it's no thought is worth thinking about. Mary, no thought is worth thinking about. Because when I'm really obsessing, if you're really stuck in thought, when I'm obsessing, I don't have a body. And you could tell me to feel my body as much as you want. It isn't there. It's that hamster in the wheel just totally engaged at that level. But if I can allow, no thought is worth thinking about. Sweet pea, I talk to myself. I'll talk to myself out loud. Sweet pea, and once that breaks, I'll have a headache. I won't have a neck because I have physically been reacting the whole time. So I see a raised hand, Ellen.
I have such a dualistic mind that I have trouble letting go of within the very prayer practice itself. I feel that I'm welcoming the symptom, the head, but it's an act of faith. It's a leap of faith to say, and the Holy Spirit, the divine indwelling must be with me now. I don't experience the divine indwelling be with me now at that moment. It's like dualistic, I guess. Like I've got this experience and I'm just going to believe that God is with me now. But I think what you're saying is that it's actually God right in that headache, right in that eye ache, and that I'm embracing being a mere human being and God is with me is that true? Because I have to break out of dualistic thinking to go there. God is often other to me. Well, I must just have to have faith and, whereas this is actually in the moment, question mark.
It is as you're moving. Remember, the false self center of gravity is self. So everything's in me and everything's outside of me. The true self center of gravity is God, not a fixed even point of reference. So that is that switch you're talking about. De Caussade in that little abandonment. I just want to read this. The realization in God that God is active in all that happens in every moment is the deepest knowledge we can have in this life of things with God. It's that sense that there is never a moment that we're apart from God. And it means that my psychological experience of the moment may not feel it at all, is what I hear you. I might not think it, but it's standing in that deeply. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alicia.
Hi, yes. I want to give a very concrete example and just have you comment on it. I have attempted to practice this prayer after a very brief introduction to it in a chapter in Cynthia Bourgeau's book. I have migraine headaches from time to time, and I actually thought I had one coming on last night, so this is timely. I can't let go of Tylenol. So I feel the headache, which is very tangible. I can't ignore what I'm feeling in my physical body. And then I attempt the welcoming. But I've had enough times where it's become full blown with all the other yucky parts of it. So if I feel this, I go get Tylenol, which last night, this is what happened. I went and got Tylenol and I got a cold pack for the back of my head and lay back down. And then I attempted the practice and the whole thing turned out beautifully. The pain went away. So can you just speak to that?
I would. I'm going to challenge your language. You didn't attempt the practice, you did the practice. That's just how the mind wants to keep it at bay. Beautifully. That's what I mean. You know that your body, something's going on, and you're going to get your Tylenol, and that's fine. What welcoming does is it just opens us at the deepest level to that reality that we are never alone. So thank you for your whole experience of it. There's no right or wrong. We teach a little differently in contemplative outreach than Cynthia. And I'll just say the biggest difference is I don't need to identify what I'm experiencing, because quite honestly, my filter is such that I'll get caught up in, am I angry? What is this? All I need to know is something's going on. And so you know something's going on, you know your history, and you know Tylenol is important. So it just gives you the added beautiful opportunity of turning to God in love. So thank you, Alicia. It's
Thank
beautiful. You did it. Don't second guess it that you attempted. Because it's letting go of the expectation that if I do it, then this would happen. I don't know what's going to happen. Sometimes it gets worse. Sometimes it gets better. Sometimes it goes away. Who knows? There's always change. But often the change is, I know that I need to go get my Tylenol. So thank you. Susie.
Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for such a very clear presentation. When you asked us to recall a situation, I went to a recent time that I felt really intense anger over the last week. And I didn't use the practice at that time, but try to use it now. And because of the intensity of that feeling, because it was a cumulative building of that emotion, when I get to the last part and I embrace this feeling or situation just as it is, I really don't feel like I'm embracing the situation just as it is. And I still have the emotion. So do you just do the practice several times? Do you just say, well, I still have the emotion, but I've at least set the intention of letting go? Where do you end up if you have such an intense emotion and you realize where it is in your body? I mean, it's in a number of places and it's very, very intense.
Wonderful, Susie. I think that's a really good example. What I do, or what I would recommend, is we stay with it as long as we're consciously able to stay with it. You know, we talked about that 90-second timer a little bit ago. I go unconscious. My capacity, what we're really expanding and welcoming is our capacity to be present in the moment in our physical beings. So anger, I'm a 1 on the Enneagram, so I relate. And where I would hold it may change, but what I will be is stay with it. And I stay with it, and it often just is into breathing it, yes. And I'm not, even look at the way we worded it. I'm letting go of my desire for security, affection, and control, and I am embracing this moment as it is. Now, in this moment includes my feeling the anger, but I am not my anger. It is a feeling or an emotion I am experiencing in my body in this moment. So that embrace is a willingness to be present in the moment, given the fact that all of this other stuff is there too. So you're present to it. And that's all I can say. Welcoming is always in the present moment when I am with the residual, because generally if I've had a real emotional, whatever you want to call it, I will have residual for a while. You know, it's like the emotional hangovers. There's just that whole level of just feeling like stuff is stuck. It also leads me to, after a period of time of welcoming and anger is still there, it generally leads me into the forgiveness practice, because I realize I'm welcoming, but now I need to forgive the fact that it ever happened. Sarah?
Hi, thank you for this presentation. Like Alicia, I have mostly learned about welcoming prayer from Cynthia Bourgeau's book, and I don't remember her expressing it, but I may have missed it, so much as an in-body experience, more as an emotional trigger. And I've been dealing with an emotional trigger, which is a situation and it's not going away, where I've felt disrespected and I get upset about that. And I have tried to take that to welcoming prayer. But it, first of all, maybe I'm too cerebral. I haven't been experiencing it in my body. So what would you recommend on that respect, in that way? And secondly, it's not a one time, it keeps coming. Okay. Because the situation is ongoing in a certain structure and relationship that I'm involved with. So just looking for your advice there.
Thank you. Several great points, Sarah. The welcoming prayer is not passive. Let me make that point. And it is not making us a doormat. It often calls us to act. The difference is to act out of our true self or our false self. So if I am in a continued situation where I repeatedly feel I am disrespected, I need to look at that, and welcoming will often be the catalyst to get me to voice it. Because see, I don't like confrontation. So when I stay with it, the reason we ground it in the body is because I don't know about your head, but I know those top 3 inches of my head, they get tangled up and they kind of go into cyberspace and they start telling the story. You know the story? Well, there they go again. Why can't they? Blah, blah. The story gets going. The welcoming prayer breaks through the story and grounds it right here, right now. What am I experiencing right now? And allows me to have the capacity to feel it in the moment, to let go of any old stuff that is just being triggered. But it may be that, guess what? You're crossing a boundary with me, or I need to speak up because something is not right here. So it has led me to open my mouth in situations that I didn't want to open my mouth or something. So anyway, I would just say that to really ground it in your body as much as you can is very helpful. But if it repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly, there may be something in the situation that I'm being asked to really address that goes above and beyond.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Megan.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. So this past year has been really rough for me physically. I had a hemorrhagic stroke, multiple brain surgeries, and over the course of my life, I've always been a very physical person. Athletics, very cognitive, type A cubed personality, sort of thing like that. And I couldn't do anything, like nothing. And so just in basic things like walking or trying to plug the monitor in on my computer, I couldn't do it. And then I lost my eyesight related to diabetes. And so I've been legally blind on top of it. And so I felt this anger. It was more of a frustration that here I was, this highly capable person on all these levels, and I was reduced to pretty much nothing, right? And so reaching out to God, sorry, you can tell it's still kind of emotional, but somebody introduced the welcoming prayer to me, and I struggled with it, but I wanted to find some calmness, some peace in my own head, literally, and my body, because I found myself very reactive. So I would scream at my computer because I couldn't see to do something, or I would try to do something physical and I just could not do it, so that I was screaming. And my poor husband and family, they're like, you're going to have another brain bleed. You need to find some inner peace and strength. And so I started to work at this, and I call what she said, the story, I call it white noise, because the white noise would not stop. And associated with the white noise was this anger and frustration. And so something happened the other day, and I feel like it was my first success with the welcoming prayer. That was kind of funny afterwards, is that I love to garden. And so there I was outside digging holes, planting plants, but getting up and down off the ground, not easy for me, right? Post-stroke. And I did it a bunch of times, but then I couldn't get up anymore. And I couldn't dig any more holes. And I was fighting with the planter's dirt. And there I am. And this thought came in, welcoming prayer. So I stopped and I laid on my belly in the dirt, like hands out. And I just said, God, my heart is open. Come sit in my heart. And I just laid there for a while, and just every time that white noise started, and for the first time after months of trying to get this to work, it worked. And there I was, like a beached whale in the dirt, covered in potting soil, smelling the soil. And all of a sudden it was calmness. And it didn't take away my frustration, but it was the success of not feeling that anguish anymore. I was okay laying there weak in the dirt, but just knowing that I was going to get through it, and that hysteria went away and the calmness settled in. And so I have a long way to go. I am not a master. I'm a novice, but it was a first success. And for people that are struggling, keep at it. It will happen, and then it won't happen and you'll fail again. But it's really a great positive tool in my life. And so thank you for this opportunity to learn from you today.
Megan, thank you for sharing, and for sharing your big journey. Because the one thing Mary would teach, there's no such thing as failure and success. It either happens or it doesn't. But what you described to me was the reality of the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And there's so much we can't. We think we can change a lot. We can't. The courage to change the things I can. And you did. You opened to the reality you were in, which is real wisdom. So thank you. That sums it up in a very big way. Joe, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yes, I was just wondering, how often should we do this? Is it every day, or, just a couple times a day? How often will you do this?
Good question, Joe. And I love Megan's example of gardening, because that's how I feel. This is like a spiritual tool. And the one thing is, the more you do it, the more comfortable you are doing it. So I recommend it is part of the vestibule I use for my afternoon sit. Like when I get up in the morning and do my readings, I can kind of slide into the chair and be there. But in the afternoon, I've been buzzing around who knows where. So it's a practice. The more I know people that use it every time they get behind the wheel of a car. The more you practice, the more organically natural the practice feels to you. So some people choose to use it in relationship, that before they see a person or talk to a person, they do this practice. So I just recommend the more you can embed it in your daily structure as a routine practice. It's a wonderful thing if you wake up in the middle of the night or as you're going to bed. Like when I get in bed and all the lights are off, my body talks like, okay, you haven't been paying attention to me all day, so let me tell you how you are. Or if you wake up in the middle of the night, some people that I work with have a lot of terror in the night or just anxiety comes up. It's a wonderful time to use this practice. The more you pray with it, the more natural it will be. And as Megan kind of shared with us, when you really get that aha moment with it, the practice begins to take over. So as much as you can. But remember, this was my statement to Mary Mrozowski. I'm going to be doing it 24/7, and she told me I should be so lucky because most of the time we're unconscious. Most of our day we go unconscious. So practice as much as we can. So we're just coming to the time where we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we will come back in silence for our centering prayer, and then we're going to move again and have our closing and a blessing.
So we come to the end of our beautiful retreat today. Thank you all for being here. And on behalf of the ComW Coordinating Committee, everyone who has participated today, and all those who will listen to this recording in the future, we thank you, Mary Dwyer. Access to the recording will be sent to all of you who registered for today. And our next half-day retreat is June 18th with guest presenter Bishop Porter Taylor, entitled Practical Mysticism, Teachings from Evelyn Underhill. You'll be receiving the flyer shortly, and we hope you'll join us for that.
Well, it's sheer joy to have been with you. And many of you have asked, this little contemplative life program booklet, the 40-day praxis offered through Contemplative Outreach. I know they're trying to print it again, but the download, the digital download should be available to you. Mary Mrozowski's daughter, also, Judith Halbrecht, wrote a biography of Mary, who was just an amazing lady. And it's called The Audacity to be Divine. And she was audacious in every sense of the word. That's also available. We also have numerous YouTube videos on the welcoming prayer on the Contemplative Outreach channel within YouTube. So if you just Google YouTube welcoming prayer, but Contemplative Outreach has its own channel, a lot of Father Thomas, a lot of good stuff up there. So I just invite you to make use of the resources. Now, as we get ready to return to the ordinary routines of our daily life, I would just like you to take a moment and raise your hands and look around. Scroll through if you have screens on your computer. I can see everybody on one, but blessing this community based in love, with radical invincible trust that the one who brought us to this will see us through it. And may each of you bless one another as you go around this circle. Knowing that we're covering so many areas of the whole wide world. So I thank you for joining us here today. And I ask you to go forth and shine your light as Holy Week begins tomorrow. And may you carry each of us with you, knowing that there is never a moment when God does not come forward, and all that takes place in us, around us, and through us hides and includes that. So let's end with Thomas's saying, God joins us wherever we are, just as we are, and only asks us to be who we are. Blessings, everyone.